So thanks to the introduction from Peter, I'm going to be a bit boring. I'm not going to be really talking about much in the way of new stuff. That comes much later with the students and other people. I've been asked to give a sort of overview and background on energy storage. So some of you might have heard a lot of this before. Now, I'm just going to say a little bit about the electricity storage network. We were formed in 2008, way before anyone thought electricity storage was remotely exciting. And so there's been a lot of sitting in dark little rooms doing boring stuff to get to the point where it is exciting. Okay, so this is roughly what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to do a very quick canter through types of storage. I'm going to focus a little bit on hydrogen, and then I'm sort of going to cover off the range of issues that storage encounters today. Now, typically I represent electricity storage, and I know there are some of my members in the room. I'm going to be talking about energy storage, so I'm not just going to be talking about electricity today. Now, just as Peter said, we like to think that energy storage is something new, exciting, and sexy that has just come into our consciousness, but actually it's been around for a very long time. So we have two flywheels in the UK, both 400 megawatts at Culham. They're used to arc up their plasma. They can't do that from the network because 800 megs drawing from the network would cause all sorts of problems. So they charge up slowly and then release all that energy quickly. In 1865, we have a rotating beam engine at the Crossness pumping station. That's not electricity, that's energy, but that involves 52-ton flywheels storing potential energy. And my partner works in computing. He runs a lot of data centers. And most of his data centers use flywheels to keep the electricity flowing between the mains going down and diesel gensets kicking in. Now, you all love your data. He wouldn't be relying on flywheels if they weren't something reliable. And then, of course, this is Norwich in northwest Wales. We've had pumped hydro energy storage for a very long time, and essentially most of our storage in the world is pumped hydro energy storage. The thing about Norwich and our other plants in the UK is that they were built in the late 1970s and 1980s. They were built by the Central Electricity Generating Board, a great mythical beast that is no longer. Some of us might be quite sad about the demise of the CEGB, but they were built for the nation as an infrastructure project. And we now have the National Infrastructure Commission, which will be looking for private funding for big infrastructure projects rather than taking it out of our taxes. And so that's an interesting way of looking at it. And indeed, the National Infrastructure Commission published a report in March that suggested that electricity storage could save the nation £2.4 billion by 2030, which is approximately £50 a household. So if we put storage in the right place in our system, it will have a huge impact on the costs, the security, and the reliability of that system. So
it's just giving me this. I don't know if it will work, but you can try it.
no, not yet.
Wait.
So energy storage, nothing new. Here are some pretty energy storage that we've been relying on for a very, very long time. A wood pile, a pile of coal, petrol, oil. I'm off gas, so my heating is oil. And then we've got some heat storage, the good old lagged copper hot water tank, and a very unattractive 1970s storage heater. The storage heater was brought in for Economy 7 to help us manage our nuclear generation, which is inflexible. It has to clatter away at full bore, and obviously demand changes. So how do you manage that demand? And the response was economy 7, economy 10, and storage heaters. So in the UK, we've had a very successful demand-side response program for many, many years, providing flexibility on our system. Right, this is more modern heat storage. This is a more attractive, well, maybe not more attractive, a more efficient hot water cylinder and a storage heater, and then a new process, which is phase change materials, which you put electricity in to change them to a liquid, so to melt them, and then they give out heat. They're exothermic when they change to a solid. So like those nice hand warmers that you can buy. But these are now, there are a variety of companies. This is Sunamp, who are in Scotland. They store heat. They're designed for diurnal cycling. It's about the size of a large, probably about the size of this computer here. Fits under your bench. It's modular. And what I'll come to heat again in a bit. So electricity storage, again, just as Peter said, it's been around for a very long time. We rely on batteries in our cars. I'm sure all of you have batteries in your back pockets, on your laps at the moment. You understand how they work. You're quite good, hopefully, at managing their state of charge, because if you're not, you're in trouble. And we rely on electricity storage. And these smaller cells are what goes into Gridscale electricity storage. Okay, this is the latest thing. This is behind the meter storage. So we've got a variety of manufacturers. Sonnen and Powerwall, they're the bottom ones. They're going for the really attractive Apple Mac approach to behind the meter storage, where it looks good and you actually stick it on your wall and you admire it and you bring your friends around and say, look, I've got a battery. Is that sensible? I'll come to that in a bit. We've got the Maslow system. They've got a subtly different approach, which is that they try to secure system services to help pay for that asset. And then the middle picture is a UPS at Kiwi Power in London. And this is the industrial and commercial scale behind the meter electricity storage. And we have Nick here from Cumulus Energy, who has a copper zinc battery, which is designed for industrial scale behind the meter storage. This is to help you manage your storage behind the meter. Not really hearing much about the industrial and commercial opportunities for storage, and I'll come to that in a bit. But UPSs potentially there's a lot of them out there. They're probably over-spec'd, so that's an untapped resource. I haven't put up pictures of the two very large-scale batteries that we currently have in the UK. We have a 6 megawatt battery at Leighton Buzzard, which was installed by UK Power Networks to meet their security of supply requirements. And there's a 10 megawatt battery at Kilroot in Northern Ireland behind the transmission connection of a high carbon power plant. Obviously, EFR will hopefully see much larger scale batteries to the order of 50 megawatts coming onto the system. There's a reason why most of the projects are no bigger than 49.9 megawatts, and that comes into planning issues. So at the moment, storage is treated like generation. And if you try to build something that's 50 megawatts, you go into a national environmental impact assessment. So if you do 49.9, you avoid that whole unwieldy process in part of your development. And also you hit license issues. You have different license categories. So really the domestic behind the meter electricity storage is a lifestyle choice. And we were hearing about, I can't remember, Andy was talking yesterday at the board meeting about societal acceptance of new technologies. And this is one where it's attractive and appealing, but perhaps not economically sensible. Whereas I&C is very much economically sensible and doesn't perhaps have to look quite so appealing on your wall. Okay, hydrogen. So you can use electricity to make something else and store that something else, and that's energy storage. And one of the big things is the hydrogen economy. Now, I often say that hydrogen is a solution in search of a problem, in that we can make hydrogen, we're just not quite sure what we're going to do with it. So there are various projects on small islands where they use excess wind power to generate hydrogen, electrolyse it from water, and then they use that in their vehicles. That is a huge saving for them on shipping in diesel for vehicles. And maybe it makes sense. You can buy hydrogen cars. They are very much like how you would operate a petrol vehicle. They have the same sort of range of 300 miles. They're incredibly expensive. They're upwards of £60,000, and there's not much infrastructure in terms of refueling. But in contrast to the electric vehicle, you don't necessarily have the range anxiety that you have that your battery is going to go flat. And the other option is that you make hydrogen and you inject it into your gas grid and you use it just like you use methane. So electrolysis of water is very energetically intensive. It's one of the most intensive energy uses you can have. There are other ways to make hydrogen that are dependent on fossil fuels that are much cheaper, but obviously not necessarily so environmentally friendly. So if you're going to have what we call excess electricity, is making hydrogen the best thing you can do with that electricity, or should you be making something else like ammonia, which is a feedstock for the chemical industry and agriculture? You could use hydrogen as electricity storage. So you'd create hydrogen using electricity, store the hydrogen, and then put it through a fuel cell and get electricity out the other side. But that is incredibly inefficient. So it's about 30% efficient. And there are people that say that it doesn't matter how efficient your energy storage is, because it might be the properties that are, the other properties that are more important. But hydrogen is commonly touted as being emission-free, and this is not, and greenhouse gas friendly. Now, my background is as a climate scientist, an atmospheric scientist, and we commonly talk about greenhouse gases as being carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. But actually, water vapour is one of the major absorbers of outgoing infrared radiation in the troposphere. So I've got a plot here of the absorbance spectrum, and you can see the various gases. 100% is at the bottom of each plot, and zero absorption is the top. So water is critical, but water we can't get an absolute concentration for like we can CO2. So you will see I've got a carbon dioxide plot from Cape Grim, which is a global atmosphere watch station in northwest Tasmania, one of 5 in the world, which is celebrating its 40th anniversary, and I'm very fond of it because I ran it for 6 years. And you can see that the CO2 plot has been steadily increasing. Kyoto came in 1997, no impact whatsoever. COP21, lots of nice statements made last November, not on this plot, but we're still pumping out CO2 very merrily. Just to be positive, I put up another plot. This is CFC 113. This is also a potent greenhouse gas, but at much lower levels in the atmosphere. But the reason it's there is that it's a Montreal gas, so it destroys ozone in the stratosphere. And you can see that the red line shows when the Montreal Protocol came into force in 1989. You can see that it took about 10 years for us to come to the inflection point and for that concentration to start coming down. And you can see that it's coming down a lot slower than it went up. And this shows that we can change what we put into the atmosphere. We can have an impact. But it's, in the case of ozone depletion, it was easy because we just had to change the chemicals we used essentially in refrigeration. It's a bit trickier to change how we generate electricity, change how we drive our cars, change where we get our heat from. And we haven't really tackled that in any major sense so that it can be seen in the atmosphere yet. So the problem with the hydrogen economy is that when you combust hydrogen, you make water vapour. And if you increase water vapour in the troposphere, you're going to increase warming. And I don't have the answer to this. I have had a quick literature search to see if what's out there on the hydrogen economy and the impact on the atmosphere and climate change. And I can find very few papers on this area. So any of you out there looking for a new exciting thing to get into, maybe the impact of the hydrogen economy on climate change is something to look at. And we have to be cautious, because if we decide that hydrogen is the thing that we're going to go for, because we can heat our homes with it, we can drive cars with it, what are the impacts? Will we be making climate change worse? So that's just a note of caution. Right. We come to an important distinction between energy and electricity storage. So energy storage covers a broad range of technologies, and I know that some of the students wanted me to go through all the technologies, and I would be here for a very, very long time talking about those technologies. Also, electricity storage is a type of energy storage, and again, I could speak for hours on each individual type. The electricity storage network does have some technical sheets on electricity storage, so I would encourage you to visit our website and search under reports, and you will find those technical sheets. But electricity storage is also a broad range of technologies. But the critical thing is that energy storage is just a demand. It takes electricity as a demand, changes it to something else. That doesn't mean you can't provide services to the system, because you can turn that demand on and off and provide firm frequency response if you can do that rapidly enough. But it doesn't export electricity out the other side. Something else comes out the other side. For electricity storage, you've got electricity in and electricity out. And it's the electricity out that causes regulatory problems, which I will come on to later. But essentially, energy storage is unregulated, but electricity storage is regulated because of the impact you have on the electricity system. So one thing is that there's been a lot of discussion about whether electricity storage will be licensed or not, and it will be licensed. It's currently licensed as generation. Our pumped hydro, 3 gigawatts of pumped hydro in the UK, is licensed as generation. So at the very minimum, storage will be licensed as generation. We don't want it to be licensed as generation. We want it to be licensed as a new asset class as storage. But why this is critical, and I'll come onto this again later, is the end user levies, which is how we fund our renewable incentive schemes in the UK. So in order to fund the feed-in tariff, the contracts for difference, and the renewable obligation, if you're an end user, which is you and me, at home and industry, you pay a levy on all the electricity you use that then helps to pay for those incentives. And unfortunately, electricity storage has not been defined as not being an end user, even though it may pass through the bulk of that electricity on its way to the eventual end user. If you're a storage operator, you pay that levy when you charge your device, and then some time later, someone else pays a levy again. And that is proving very difficult to resolve, even though you would think that that's a double charge and very unfair, but it's not straightforward, apparently. So storage in the UK. Most of the current storage in the UK has been installed as part of Ofgem's low carbon network innovation projects. Most of it has been small scale and lots of it interesting. We've probably got about 20 megawatts of storage connected to the distribution network at the moment, and that includes the 6 megawatts at Leighton Buzzard and the 10 megawatts in Ireland. So that doesn't leave a great deal left sprinkled elsewhere. There's potentially 2 megawatts behind the meter in innovation projects. I should point out that the AES Kilroot project is a fully commercial project. It's not an innovation funded project. That one benefits from the fact that it was installed on existing land behind an existing connection at a large-scale power station. EirGrid and Sony, which are the system operators in the all-Ireland system, are finding this asset really useful, really helpful in helping them to manage the system because of its speed of response. And indeed, in Ireland, they have a new system service approach called DS3, which comes in October with 14 new services. They have decided that they want a system that can accommodate 70% of renewables, and so they have decided to change the services that they require in order to deliver that aspiration, rather than here in GB, where we're just muddling along with some vague hope that we'll get there eventually. And, you know, we have had a new service. AES hope to build a 100 megawatt battery on the same site, again, because they have the land available. Right. Okay, domestic electricity storage. So this is where it comes to, are people doing it because it's, you know, a lifestyle choice, or are they actually going to save lots of money? And the answer is they're not going to save lots of money. So you can see the chart on the left. If you put in a new system, it's going to take you approximately 17 years to pay back solar and batteries. If you try and retrofit it, it's 24 years. If you go to 2030, you can see that the payback period has come down, but the consumer likes to see a payback in about 5 to 7 years for it to be truly attractive in economic terms. And you can see that in 2030, it's still not attractive. And so this is this is a critical problem. The systems currently cost £3,000 to £8,000. So that's not cheap. Depends what you go for. You might save about £200 to £500 in not importing electricity from your supplier. And in the future, you may make £50 to £100 a year on providing system services. This is the Moixa model, where they retain some interest in the battery. They don't just kind of come in and install your battery and go away and leave you to it. They aggregate their behind-the-meter battery devices so that they can provide services, and this is their kind of model. But again, it's a long time to pay back. And I guess the critical thing is that if you and I put a battery behind our meter, we put it in there for our needs and our purposes. We haven't put it in to be nice to the system. And you know, we're going to have to be paid appropriately to do nice things for the system. And sometimes, you know, the potential service value is perhaps not enough to motivate you to behave in a system supportive way. For I&C behind the meter, it's economic now. I don't have any nice plots on that because large customers see the red, amber and green distribution use of system charging, and they can use their behind the meter storage to avoid those red periods of very high use of system charges. And if they could provide system services on top of that, that's a benefit. That's another income stream that they can access. But at the moment, it's economic. It's just that it hasn't quite taken off in the same way as the Powerwall and Sonnen batteries, etc. but that is definitely an area that should grow to help people manage their energy. Okay, what about heat? I've talked a lot about electricity because that's what I do, but there was a report published last week by Policy Exchange that described heat as the Cinderella of our carbon budget, our decarbonisation, because we haven't really done a great deal to address how we heat our homes. And you will see that 70 to 80% of a householder's spend is on heat, not electricity. So you're putting in a battery behind the meter to help you manage 20 to 30% of your energy spend. When if you did something about heat, you would have a real impact on your energy spend. So at the moment we have about 14 million system boilers in the UK, and that's systems that have a boiler and a hot water tank, because of course we've been tossing out hot water tanks with gay abandon with new boiler systems. And if you looked at just the electric heating systems only, so those are systems that have a hot water tank and an immersion heater, there's a potential 30 gigawatts of flexibility already out there on our system. Now, heat storage can only act as demand, so you use excess electricity to turn on the immersion heater essentially. But the benefits of that is you've already heated your water using excess, say, wind generation. You haven't paid constraint payments to your wind generators. And if I've already got hot water sitting in my hot water tank, I don't need to use my gas to reheat, or more electricity to reheat that water, so I'm saving with carbon emissions as well in the long run. The problem is, as I said before, how much is that flexibility worth to you as an individual householder? And Northern Power Grids, in their customer-led network revolution, were prepared to offer up to £50 a year to a household for potentially responding to 15 events where they had total control of all your appliances. Then National Grid recently completed an innovation project looking at using EVs and heat pumps for frequency response. So they would control the charging of the battery of the EV, not actually use the battery itself. And National Grid would be prepared to pay you £25 a year for that service. And when we were asked at last year's Low Carbon Network Innovation Conference how many of us would be prepared to get out of bed for £25, there was probably about 3 people in an audience of 200 that found £25 sufficiently motivating. So this is the problem. And then Gridscale estimate that, this is Moix's Gridscale program, they reckon that they can get £70 per annum. And that's against an annual spend of about £1,400 on electricity. So this is where the problem comes. So, and the other thing I want to make is that often we get trapped into thinking that decarbonisation equals total electrification. I get very irritated when everybody tells me that we've got to electrify heat and we've got to electrify transport, because there are ways of decoupling electricity from those vectors that doesn't mean that reducing carbon means you have to fully rely on electricity. And this is critical because our peak heat demand in winter is 300 gigawatts. We support that at the moment through gas. There is absolutely no way we could ever build the distribution network and the transmission network to sustain an electricity demand of 300 gigawatts. So we have to think differently, and the way to think differently is to think about storage. And Policy Exchange were very keen to focus on syngas and biogas and hydrogen as their answer to decarbonising the heat. They didn't feel that solar thermal was usable because the solar peak is decoupled from the heat peak. However, solar PV is about 20 to 30% efficient at converting the sun's energy to electricity. Solar thermal is about 60 to 70% at converting the sun's energy to heat. And of course, if you then have a heat store, and you don't need to do this interseasonally, because there's still enough solar in winter to provide about 30 to 40% of your heat demand. Because even though it's weak and weedy, it's still doing something. So the absence of any mention of storage in this report was a bit distressing. So we come to industrial and commercial. So this is a much bigger opportunity. Even industrial and commercial properties, their energy spend is 50 to 60% on heating and cooling. And you know, if they used heat as well as electricity stores, they could also save a lot of energy. You know, there's a project in America where they freeze ice, use electricity to freeze ice overnight, and then they put their air conditioning through that ice during the day to provide the cooling. And there's also ways of using heat. Now, if you've got on-site generation and electricity storage, you're going to do better, but quite often on-site generation is a diesel genset. And as a result of pretty much all new builds in the capacity market being diesel gensets, the government is not very happy about that because diesel gensets are high carbon, although you could argue that they're only on for a very short time and so their emissions are quite small, but that's still high carbon. And as a result, there is a review of embedded benefits which are given to generation below 100 megawatts connected at the distribution network level, and the transmission network connected generators don't like this very much. And if we lost those embedded benefits, it would be bad for storage. Now I'm going to focus a little bit on specific things now. So this is the UK Power Network Smarter Network Storage at Leighton Buzzard. So that was essentially installed to help avoid reinforcing that particular low voltage feeder. Their winter demand on that low voltage feeder was higher than they could provide down the two lines they had. They would have had to put in, I think it was 22 miles of wires and an additional transformer, which would have cost them just over £6 million, and they chose to put in a storage device, which, as you can see, is a bit more expensive than the traditional wires and transformer route. However, that 11.2 million price will have come down a bit further due to the cost reductions in lithium-ion batteries. It's a bit difficult for me to give you a figure that it would be now. And the other issue is that while the cost of batteries are dropping quite rapidly, the cost of the balance of plant, which you need to run your battery, is not dropping quite so quickly. So you need to be looking at reducing the costs of all of it, not just the batteries. So a problem for the distribution network operator is how do they monetize avoided reinforcement so that a third party can come in and do that, and that's very difficult, which is why we would like to see distribution network operators have the potential to own and operate in certain circumstances. And so this battery has successfully kept a number of streets up in winter. So that's delivering capacity essentially, or what they call peak shaving. It's managed triad avoidance. Do I need to go into what triads are? If you need to know what a triad is, come and see me in a break. And that was quite lucrative, triad avoidance. Store, not very impressive. And frequency response, that's where a lot of the value sat for this project. And you can see in this bottom plot, and I would recommend going to their project site. There's a lot of reports there on business models, technical details, regulatory issues. There's a regulatory paper due out very soon with an update. But you can see that how the DNO might make up income versus how a third party might make up income are two different things. And the way the Leighton Buzzard battery is operated is the DNO, distribution network operator, has priority for its winter peak, and then it hands it off to a third party. This is because of regulatory issues. It hands it off to contracted third parties who then deliver the other services. Right. So, new system services. So why do we need storage? I've whittled on for ages about how magnificent storage is and how many types there are and what it can do. But why do we need storage? So one of the issues is managing intermittency. So the wind isn't always blowing, the sun isn't always shining. So what do we do with the excess? What do we do when there's no generation? The main interest at the moment is the loss of inertia. And you're all engineers, aren't you? So you all know about inertia and spinning reserve. I'm now going to be nervous because I'm going to start quoting sort of National Grid numbers, and there are people from National Grid in the audience, so they're going to shout at me if I get it wrong. But essentially, when we had high carbon thermal generation, it's got big spinning turbines, they're going round, and that's got inertia in it, which I like to think of as a sponge to insulate us from issues on the system. It gives us a bit of flexibility. We've got a nice bit of time to deal with any problems. And I understand that we had 12 seconds, if there was a frequency issue, to press the buttons in the control center and make it all better. But with the loss of a lot of our high carbon plants, so that's a lot of coal has come off the system, not because of greenhouse gases, but more from air quality issues. So that's the Large Combustion Plant Directive from Europe. We're now down to 6 seconds, roughly. And our most fast-acting storage that we have on the system at the moment, aside from the little bits of battery we've got, is de Norwig, which is 5 seconds. So you can see that people in the control centre might be feeling a little bit nervous that, you know, the amount of time they've got to deal with something is getting shorter. So that's why National Grid proposed the enhanced frequency response service, for which we were all very excited. I'm just going to talk a little bit about demand turn-up. So one of the other problems the system operator has is in midsummer, all that lovely solar is generating, but it's all connected at the bottom of the system. The national system operator sees that as minimum demand. And it gets difficult if you have to take generation off the system because the demand is so low. So if you can turn up some demand somewhere, that increases your demand and gives you a bit more flexibility. Enhanced frequency response. So there's a lot of numbers there on enhanced frequency response. So National Grid wanted 200 megawatts total of a sub-second response. 75 parties pre-qualified with 7.5 gigawatts bid. So that's much more than they actually wanted. The poor distribution network operators had to deal with 20 gigawatts of connection requests, and the transmission system had 0.5 gigawatts of connection requests. In the end, 37 parties bid a total of 5 gigawatts in the actual tender. You can see the numbers there. I'm not going to go into the numbers. 8 parties were accepted, 7 providers. 6 of those providers are 100% available to provide EFR. That means they can provide no other services. So often for storage, we say we need to stack services in order to get the value. Well, if you bid in 35,088 hours, that's every hour for 4 years. That's all you're going to be doing, and that's possibly not the best and most efficient use of storage. There was one provider who's opted out to do triad avoidance. The first asset is due for delivery in 2017, that's Vattenfall, and National Grid say that this service will save the consumer £200 million in balancing service costs. The only other thing I'm going to say is that the average bid price, successful bid price, was £9.78. I think that's right, per megawatt. And I guess it's widely viewed in industry that that is somewhat low. There are a couple of providers who are existing big utilities who have the advantage of land and connections, so that gives them a bit of a discount. But anyone who's trying to build a new storage project, that doesn't feel like enough money. So it will be interesting to see if that comes off. Okay, my last slide, essentially. Right, regulations in commercial. This is what I do. I spend my time sitting at beers and Ofgem talking about regulations. So this is a very active area. Indeed, yesterday there was a vote in the European Parliament on the Industrial Technology and Research and Energy Committee own initiative report, which included many amendments for storage, which will feed into the amendments to the EU third package, which is market arrangements and unbundling, which came into force in the UK. And this is all very boring, isn't it? I'm getting very excited about regulations. Came into force in 2011. And the problem is that we created our regulations. We didn't have storage. We had distribution, we had transmission, we had supply, and we had generation. And storage doesn't really fit into any of those. And indeed, the EU in their third package didn't define storage. So it's just this dreadful, tricky thing that no one knows how to treat. And in the UK, we tend to treat it as generation. So our position at the Electricity Storage Network is that there should be a specific definition, and we have proposed one. We need a new asset class, so we would add storage to those four. I should say that we also now have interconnectors, so it's not without precedent that we create a new asset class, and we need a license. And then there are a whole range of very unpleasant, complicated issues that just make it tricky. So for instance, if you try to connect a storage device to the distribution network, it will be treated on one side as demand and one side as generation. That means two teams processing an application for a single asset. And so those poor DNOs with their 20 gigawatts of application requests had to go through a lot of work, and indeed only 3% of those applicants took up their offers, because you don't have to pay when you apply, you only pay when you accept. So the poor distribution network operators did a lot of work, and those 3% will pay all those costs. The government are very keen on the partnership between renewables and storage, and there have been a lot of consultations on how you can secure your renewable obligation and your contract for difference, not so much feed-in tariff, when you put storage on your site. And they see that as a key way of delivering storage onto the system. So I expect that that will continue to build. And I've already talked about the energy use levies. So yeah, it's not very easy to stack services, but do we need to stack? Because nobody providing EFR is stacking. So yes, it's all very complicated. It's very much a work in progress. I will just give a quick plug for the BEERS Ofgem call for evidence on smart energy, which is due out imminently, but it's been due out imminently since May. And that might be something that you might want to look at or respond to. All right. Thank you.